Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to learning about VisualBasic.net. In the last two videos, we've been looking at using a data reader to process data from a Microsoft Access database to quickly pull it into an inquiry program where we can quickly look at the data in a data grid view. The first one we created in video number 76 was strictly to create a prototype. We hard-coded the information about our database in the class we were working with. We processed the data and presented it. Then in video number 77, we created a breakup of the connection string from being hard-coded in our program to moving it to a different location where we could adapt and modify it much easier as our needs would change during the development of the program. So in this video, we're going to take it one step further. We're going to separate the user interface, the Windows form, and everything that's related to the Windows form. We're going to separate it from all activity related to the data access layer of accessing the database so that there's a clear separation. They will communicate together, but they'll be separate. And that gives us the ability to modify our user interface easily, as well as we can take the data access layer part of our code and use it for other projects because we've already defined many of the things we would need for other projects. So there's a real good advantage about pulling those apart, and it also makes it a professional quality type program. And once again, we're going to be using the data reader in this. We're just going to take video 76 and 77 that we've worked with already, and we're going to then change it a little bit. It'll do the same thing, but we'll see that separation of data. And the whole point I want to stress here is as you work on a program and you're moving it toward a more professional quality program, you want to keep those layers separate so that you can modify them easily, and also it gives you the ability to keep things separate and cleaner, actually, because everything is in its own particular area. So let's go into our program. Let's review what we've done thus far, and then let's separate that user interface from the data access layer. Okay, I have our Visual Studio up, and you see our basic screen here that we have. And let's just run this real quick. I'll hit a start, and we'll run this, and you'll see how it works. And here is our program running, our general data reader. And if I type in, for example, B for the last name, anything beginning with a B in the last name should be found in our database. And surely enough, it does. If I delete out the last name and just hit the search button on our toolbar, then I get all the data in there from our Microsoft Access database. So it's a very simple inquiry screen using a data grid view. I have the search button on the toolbar, and then I also have a text box as well to input the last name search criteria that I might want to use. Now, if I did not enter in a correct one and hit search, we get back a message saying search criteria yielded no records, and that's what we want to have happen. Now let's see about modifying this program to make it better. Okay. Well, first of all, since we're going to make this professional, let's add a little glitz to our screen. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to change the text for our form to better data reader on that, because we now are going to have a nice data reader. So our text is changed. Also, just add a little bit of extra. I'm going to go to the icon and change the icon from its generic one to pull in the one I use for mine. So now I've got a little bit better looking screen, just a little cosmetic task that I've done there. Now let's look at our code. Okay, now I'm going to change the view a little bit here. Let's first of all come up to the top where I have the documentation. You'll see that I have the image out at Imgur, so you can see what the form looks like with data in it. Also, you'll see my first version, my prototype version, the original bare bones data reader at Pastebin, and then video number 77, our general data reader, where we're starting with right now, is located at this location at Pastebin, so you can see the code. And our final product with all the documentation will be out at our third location at Pastebin, our better data reader on that. And of course, other videos are available to watch out at Bolen Presents at youtube.com. Once again, we had basically 3 videos in this series. Video number 76 was where we started with our bare bones data reader. Then 77 is where we introduced the concept of our connection string, where we moved it from being hard-coded to a app config file and processed it there. And now we're going to work at the data access layer and the user interface layers to separate them. So here you may want to stop your video and take a look at these locations out at Pastebin and write them down perhaps and then study them later after the video is done. Now let's take a look at what we did in the second video where we actually changed our hard-coded connection string. Well, you see I had originally the connection string coded in my prototype program here going out to the Microsoft Access database Northwind, stored in a special spot I have on my drive. And here we see the provider I was using was the Jet Access Engine. This uses the OLEDB access and the security credentials necessary to get there. We then, in the process of moving this, we created our solution. We right-clicked and we said add, and we said new project, and we created a class project. You'll see it pop in here. We can create a class library project, and we did that and called it DAL. So we introduced a new project into our program. Then we added to it the Northwind DB class, and then that class was very simple. We added a reference to the system configuration to the project by coming over to the project on our DAL project. We hit a right-click, add reference. We went then against the assembly and we scrolled down till we found the system configuration and clicked on it and added it to our project. That then gave us the ability to use the configuration manager in our program. And we also brought in the imports of the system data OLEDB because we were working with the Microsoft Access database. Now, once again, if I was using an SQL server or SQL Express or an SQL local DB, I would have used system.data.sql client here. So this gave me the ability to quickly code in and reference these objects I was going to be using, and we created a function called getConnection. And this function would go out using the configuration manager to find the Northwind in our app config file, and then it would return back a new OLEDB connection to the program or class that called it. Now let's take a look at the app config file once again real quickly, and that is in our general data reader area. I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that we have the connection string section in our app config area that we added in, and we referenced it as Northwind DB, giving it a name, and then we took the hard-coded information that we started out with and put it into the area of our connection string to be retrieved. So we're now using dynamically the app config file, and we're using the Northwind DB class here with the get connection function that I've added to get the information about our OLEDB connection. Okay, that's a lot what we did. Then we also had to go back after we got that part of our data access layer completed. We went back to our project in our general data reader, and we added a reference once again back to the DAL project on that. So I went to the project and added that reference. So that became aware of the data access layer project in our solution. Well, that took care of a lot of things. It got our two layers, our data access layer, project area, and our user interface layer of the general data reader. So that got that all set, and then we began to do our coding. And let's go back to our inquiry form. In our inquiry form, that we then added the import statement to our data access layer on that. And also we added our system.data.oledb here as well, because we were going to make references to the different functions or components within that namespace. Now coming down, we had our data grid set and got that all set in code, make it look good. But then we came down to the real meat and bones of our program, which is when we clicked on the search button, we came in, we got the query select string that we were going to be using. And once again, I advise you not to use the wildcard, but to code the actual names that you're going to be using. And in this case, with the Northwind database from Microsoft, some of their field names or column names had spaces in it. So we had to put the brackets around it. So you see the brackets around last name on that. Normally when you're coding a database from scratch, you do not want to have spaces in the column names. Rather, you want to use a what we call Pascal casing, where we have uppercase beginning each part of the main parts of the name. So we see our query string. Then we are taking now advantage of our new Northwind DB get connection function to get the information to our OLEDB connection and processing the query using our data reader. The data reader is a very efficient way to retrieve data. It is a forward-looking only type of approach, but it does work very efficiently. And that's why for this one, it is a good one, because this is a query screen where we want to quickly bring data to the user using the data grid view. We then took that information, and if we had rows in the data grid or in the reader, we would then use the binding source and connect that to our data grid view to get everything linked up and tied together. Well, we want to get this part out of our code now. This is data access layer kind of code, and we want to move that out of here into our data access layer project. So let's begin by creating a new, in this case, a customers DB class in our data access layer. So I'm going to go over to the data access layer in the solution area, right click on this and do an add new item. And the new item I'm going to be adding in this case is a class, and I'm going to call this the customer DB class since we're going against the customer table. Customers DB, and hit add. Now I've got a new class, and in that class I want to first of all above the class itself add the import statement of system.data.oledb. And that'll make it easier for me to reference things within that namespace. Since we are working with a Microsoft Access database, I need the OLEDB. Once again, if I'm using a Microsoft SQL server, it'd be the SQL client. So I've got my import statement. I've got my class name. Now let's add a function that we're going to be working with. And this function is going to be a public function. It's going to be a shared function. And the function is going to be called get customers by last name. And I'm going to pass in by value last name as string, and I'm going to return back to my calling class a data table. There we go. Now, this gets it set up. Let's go back now to our inquiry form. And I'm going to basically take everything out of here. So I'm going to just grab from here, drag on down, and we'll just take all of this. I'm going to take a copy and come back over now to my customer DB area and paste it in. And then we'll modify it. Okay. Well, we're almost the same, but there are some differences. And one of the things we're going to do after we come through and declare our query is we're going to also declare a data table, because that is what we're going to be returning back to our calling class. So I'm going to dim DB as new data table. Okay. Everything works here the same on that. So as we come through, we're doing everything here, but we're going to do something a little different through here. What I'm going to do is, at this point, we're going to not do this part. Rather, what I'm going to do is knock this part out, leaving us just our data reader. And what I'm going to use is the method called table load. So I'm going to use data table load, and I'm going to load the reader. And it's going to quickly process the reader into place. And this time, instead of having all this data being processed here, I'm going to wipe out the errors that we might have just having a single exception. What I'm going to do here is not use this area to display a message, but rather to throw an exception back to the class on that. So we'll just call that a catch on that. And then we're going to return the table. And there we go. So all I've done is added to our original part in our query the declaration of a table, data table. I've modified how we're processing this. Now I could have also used a data adapter passing in the command and then loading a table as well. Both are basically the essential things, but I'm going to be using the data reader since we started out with that. And then I use the table load, and then I'm returning back the table after I get it processed. So that takes care of that part of the code. So I'm going to save that. Now let's go back to our inquiry form where we started and get rid of all the stuff that we wanted to get out of there to begin with. So we basically, at this point, are getting rid of all this through here. I'm going to hold off on the try a little bit because I will need that. And what we're going to be doing here, and I'm going to code it right here, and then we'll come back and clean it up. We're going to dim a data table And I don't need to use the new one because I'll be getting it from my class that I just created. I'll be getting it from my customer DB get customer by last name, passing into it my text box information. In this case, it was my last name, text box, text. And there we go. That takes care of that part. Then what I'm going to do is, if my table rows count is greater than 0, which means I have some rows that came in, then what I want to do is take the binding source, data source, and assign it the table to that. Okay. And then I'm going to take the inquiry data grid data source and assign the binding source to it. Okay. Now, here's where I might not have any rows, so I want an else here. And in this one, I'm going to put in the message that I had down here below. Copy it up here and drop it in here on that. So now, if I don't have any rows, I'm going to give the message back. And at this point now, I can get rid of all this information down here below. Scroll down and delete that out. Now, I do need to keep in the error catching messages because my program where I'm calling from may throw an exception. And if it does, I'll cascade down and catch the various exceptions that could occur. But now look how clean it is in my user interface. I'm declaring a table. It's being initialized and filled with information. And then I'm checking to make certain I have some rows. If I do, I take the table and assign it to the binding source that we declared up to the very top where we had the binding source declared. And then I'm taking the binding source and assigning it to the data source of the data grid view. Well, let's see if it works. So I'm going to hit the start button and see if it compiles. Whoops, we have a build error, so let me see where I made the mistake. And last name tool strip. Okay, let me come back up and check that. And see where I made the error on that. Oh, it's over in the data access layer. I must have left something there. There's our error. That's right, because now we're passing in last name. So basically, we're changing that. I'm going to take that out and use last name, because now we're passing it in and it won't be available. And that's where our error came from. So now let's save it. Let's try to recompile it and run it. I'm going to hit NB for a search, and it worked fine. I'll hit in a, well, let's go with X for a change. And there it came in, and I'm going to delete out last name and see all records. They all came in fine. Okay, so let's review what we did. This now is ready for production release. What I did in the code, once again, was I started at the very top of our program with our queries form. And what I initially had done was I had a hard-coded connection string. We moved that connection string to the app config file. We processed our connection. Then we took the information that we had here and simply created a table, and we created a function in our customer DB in our data access layer, and we passed in the last name into that function. It then gave us back a table. We processed the table, and everything that's related to the user interface is in this form. Now, the only reason we have at this point the import statement for the system data.oledb is because we're going to want to catch any of those kinds of exception messages that might come back from our data access layer. So we could actually code in the full name down here, but instead I used the import statement to make it easier to code through here. So that took care of that. We also created our customer DB class in our data access layer, and we passed in the last name text box text property, its value, into our function. We kept our selection string exactly the same, but we did add the creation of a table here. Then we changed everything in here was done with the idea of returning back a table. So we used the reader in this case with the table load method, and we threw back the table when we were done. If we had any kind of error here, it went back to the user interface where it got processed. So we've separated everything in our program. Once again, let's run the program again. I'll put in, see if we have anything that starts with C. We do not have anything with C. Let's try B, where I know I have at least 2 records, and they came in fine. Well, there you go. We've got it working the way we want it to work. And what we've done is made this a professional type of program at this point, because we've separated the user interface, all the messages and everything that related to the user and their experience is in one class, and then in a different project, in the data access layer project, we have those things related to accessing and working with our database. We have our Northwind DB to get our connection, and we also have our customers DB class to return back our table from the information from the query that we want to have to see the data in our data grid view. And the whole point of this is that while it takes just a few seconds to separate things out, you'll find out as you're building on a project and you add more things, that data access layer that I created as a separate project will have more and more classes in it accessing the data, throwing it back to whatever form that might be displayed at the time. So I might have an initial form that might act as a menu, and then I have a series of maintenance programs and inquiry program screens that then go against the data access layer. And so I can build up things separately and keep them easily to be maintained, and I can even create new projects taking out and extracting maybe my data access layer out of there, or maybe I want to take my inquiry screen, extract it out, and add a different database. Maybe now I want to switch it over to going against the Northwind as a SQL client database, not as a Microsoft Access database. So by separating that, it makes it easier for us to maintain. Initially, it may seem a little bit difficult, but this is the way you want to start looking toward getting your programs to become more of a professional type program. In small programs, you may not see too much, but trust me, as you develop and grow in your abilities and skills, you'll want to start learning how to separate these out. So we have a data access layer, maybe a business logic layer where we have business rules, and then our user interface layer. So with those ideas in mind, good luck. Get your hands dirty in the code. Go out to Pastebin and take a look at the code of the general data reader, our bare bones data reader, and finally our better data reader that we just did. So you can see how we developed it from a prototype to separating it out to a more professional program. So you take care. Until next time, be good.